Perfect.
Well, good morning to everyone who's joining us. I see that we have so far around about 30 attendees, so a big welcome. We're going to get started in just over 1.5 minutes. I see some familiar faces, so that's always good to see some familiar faces, and I definitely see some new names or faces. So welcome if you're joining for the very first time. And then people like Ian and Peter and Nicole and Andy and Anna, you're all most welcome back. And we'll talk about why we've restarted the Global Connect series as we get there. As I mentioned, Ellen's going to be starting in about 1 minute, just over 1 minute. Al, your time is just stuck on the 1:43. But if you can just write in the chat any messages that you have, it's good to be back. I see something coming through in the chat. It's good to be back. Where have you been? You're welcome to write any messages, any questions in the chat, as most of you on this call know. I see people are pinging me the whole time, getting into the room. Some people, it just says attendee, but good afternoon from Dubai. Thanks, Tony. Great to be back. As I say, it's really exciting for us to be back. Good morning from the UK. So that's great. I know we've got some people in Africa. We've got some people in the UK, Mitch. So people are joining fast and furiously, which is great to see. So Ellen, as I mentioned, is going to be joining us now, and we're going to be starting in, hey, there's someone from Sandton, all the way from Sandton, someone from London, someone from Durban. So it's really good to see the different people joining at the different times, different places, etc. And today we're going to be talking about value creation at scale. And just a quick reminder, if possible, you can turn your cameras on. We are trying a new technology with Teams today, so maybe that's not going to work. Maybe it's going to work. But remember, just the distractions off, your phones turned off, your pings, dings, and rings, as they would say. And then actively participate, share your insights. We are going to be asking questions, and then we want as many answers in the chat as possible. And we will test opening up the mic, etc. How's it from Durban, South Africa? That sounds like a very South African thing to say. How's it? Good morning from Cape Town. So lots of people joining. So Alan, we're going to be talking today about value creation at scale. And it's quite interesting, you wrote in the heading there, and it has nothing to do with AI. So, Alan, you know my view on AI, but AI is everywhere. It's in every keynote I've been to. It's been in every boardroom I go to. It's in team meetings. Now, how do we use AI? What are the prompts? How do we scale with AI? Will AI fix our performance challenge? Because we're really trying to grow. The reality is AI is not your biggest multiplier. Your customer is. Now, at the risk of stating the obvious, but when your strategy, your plans, your conversations, all the things you do internally are built around your customer's story, everything else scales, with or without AI. So that's really what we're going to be talking today about. Is if you came on here expecting this is a Tony and Alan discussion around AI and how to use it to scale your sales, you may be disappointed. On the other hand, we're really going to cut to this really most important part, the customer. And Global Connects are back. So it's been an arm wrestle. Internally, we've had discussions around should we do the Global Connect, should we do them in the same format as before? But it's been more or less 2 years since we ran the last one. And I'm super excited to say Global Connects are back. And what we've done is we've made it what we call a part of our Managers as Multipliers series. So we believe managers, sales managers, or any other managers actually are multipliers. And we're going to be talking about that throughout the series into 2026 and beyond. And this is part of that series. For those of you who are regulars, you know that we run these Global Connects on a regular cadence, more or less every second or so month when we were running them. So the next one is coming up on the 11th of February 2026. So for any of you who find value in today's session, please invite your colleagues, your friends, your relatives, anyone who's in sales, or anyone actually who's got this mindset of a growth in anything that they're trying to do. Invite them. And on the 11th of February, it's going to be on the Stoic sales mindset. So how do we leverage your mind, your mindsets, to manage the chaos of sales? Really practical, let's call it hard-hitting ideas that say, what can we learn from all of those Stoics? And what do they say in terms of sales? And how do we interpret, how could Stoics help a salesperson, a sales manager, a sales leader, a business leader, and so on? So that's coming up on the 11th of February. And then as part of our Managers as Multipliers series, we're also launching a workshop specifically for sales enablement professionals, for sales enablement leaders. And we're going to be running our first one of the sales enablement multiplied on the 26th of February. Very focused at the sales enablement community. This one will be called Unlocking Growth Through Enablement. And it's going to focus on helping sales enablement tell their story of impact. Because many of our customers are telling us the sales enablement are doing many good things, but they can't always get the business to see that story of impact. And in the world of AI and everyone's being replaced by AI, I think this will be a massive session for any of you who are in sales enablement. And that's on the 26th of February. The other thing, last thing I'll say before handing over to Alan, we will be publishing a full list of all these events for 2026 on our website. So you'll be able to go in and plan well in advance. Okay, there's a session in April, there's a session in August, whatever it may be. So Alan, today we're here to talk about customers and value and accounts. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tony, and everyone, thanks for joining us on the Global Connect. Good to be back here. As Tony said, part of our Managers as a Multiplier series, and really with the intent to continue to upscale the profession of sales. Our mission at Growth Matters, we grow people who grow companies that change the world. So I'm going to get going straight away. We've got an hour. We've got a lot we want to share with you as always. But I want to start with what might feel like we're going in a different direction. But if you haven't met Captain Obvious, this is Captain Obvious. And Captain Obvious says that the mechanism to identify and multiply custom value should be your account plan. So we're going to be speaking about this in a bit of detail and looking at those different multipliers. Now, please, what we're not saying is that there isn't benefit in technology, but we're going to share with you the danger when we don't get our strategy right, we don't get our systems mature. Because for most organizations that we see, we are not seeing that the account management maturity supports customer value realization, customer value multiplication, or customer growth. So the intent is there, but it's not getting where it needs to get to. Now, that might be because of what we've been exposed to as we work with companies around the world, but maybe you want to share with us where you're at. So we've got a 3-minute timer. We've got a couple of conversations we're going to be having. We're not giving you 3 minutes to answer this. 3 minutes is our conversation window, where Tony will be pulling through some things from the chat. But in one word, I love limiting people. One word, I'm sure we need some more than one, Tony. What frustrates you most about account planning today? Maybe it doesn't, but if you had to say one word, what would that one word be? So let's really humanize this thing around account planning. And Tony, you'll keep your eye on the chat. And if anyone that wants to share, just get a sense of when we talk about account planning, does it feel like this is the way we create value at scale? Or is there a different one word? Hopefully not a four-letter word, but one word that describes account planning and account management today. Let's see what's coming through, Tony.
Okay, Alan, so we've had a few responses. First one was time. So clearly we don't have enough time. The second one was two words, but hyphenated. So useless information, data silos. So definitely we can't get to the data, the information. Consequence, and I would assume the person sharing consequence is saying there's no consequence if we don't get this right, or perhaps there's no consequence if we don't complete the account plans. Someone sharing delayed, many different formats used within the company, so it's very difficult to do. It's static. That's a great word. It's static. Let's do it once and then put it in the bottom drawer. Execution, something we talk about often, Alan, the ability to get things done through others. Accountability, response rate, execution, allocation of effort. So really, is this worth doing? Is it the right thing we should be doing? Follow through and the lack of follow through. Simplicity. So it's not simple enough. Wow, this is amazing. Isolated. So I'm not doing it in collaboration, and value. So account planning is great, Al, maybe, but we don't talk about what is the value that we can unlock for a customer possibly. So love all these responses. Your thoughts on any or all of those, Al?
Yeah, Tony, let's bring it to all of there is quite a common thread that's coming through. There's some that are coming through that are saying maybe it is simple and it's a great tool for allocation of effort and it's a thing we can do. So if you are at that space as you're leading into this global connect and you feel, no, I think we've got this kind of waxed, this is working where we're at. That's wonderful, but we still want to share with you how you can find those multipliers and how you can really drive that value creation at scale. But for many and most companies, it feels like it's a one-off event, like it's a tick box exercise. We put in all the data, we say, great, that's done, and we go on with our day jobs. It doesn't inform our behavior, doesn't inform our interactions, doesn't align the organization, and doesn't really bring us to that point where we can be driving value at scale. And what often happens is organizations, Tony, try and resolve their problem with technology. And the real problem is not technology. It's about alignment to the customer expectations. So what we see often is that more tech can create complexity and noise. Now, once again, this is not a slight to technology. There's a lot of value in technology and enablement, right? But we've got to make sure that what we're trying to enable is there. And for so many organizations, it's not about more alignment. It's not about that clarity and scale that we want to leverage that technology for. So when we look at this from this perspective, that what we think we're seeing is how do we get AI into our account planning? How do we get AI into these areas? And it's actually a very valuable tool. We utilize it as well. But does it know what it's looking for? Do we know what good looks like? Do we know the job that account management is hired to do? Because the challenge is if we don't get that piece right, if there's no follow through, and if it's delayed, and if it's a one-off exercise, and if it's just about data, we're just going to scale that challenge. And I still remember this quote from Bill Gates, a very old quote, somewhat redacted because he said the first rule and the second rule, but effectively automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. Sorry, that's jumping ahead there. Automation applied to inefficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. So once again, what we're going to realize is we're going to have a rethink about what we see as account management. But in most organizations, it's not doing what it needs to do. And how can we find the levers and the mechanisms and the approaches to drive value at scale and leverage technology into that if we haven't matured our mindset around what good really looks like? And not just good, but practical. Because if we're begging account managers to do this, if we're begging things to get done, if we're begging for more information, if we're doing that once a year, well, then it's going to feel a lot like it's just a box we have to tick. And the problem is that's going to cost us in terms of value at scale. And as a result, we end up, Tony, with this workhorse. right? Now, as everyone reflects on this, the workforce is working 11-hour days. They have to be in every meeting, responding to every request, driving every internal priority, very busy, but not aligned. And unless we get really clear on what is it specifically we're trying to do to help protect, partner, and grow these accounts, we're not going to find those high leverages. And as a result, the question becomes, are we working hard enough, which is around effort? But it's not about, are we working on the multipliers that matter, which is about direction. And don't worry, that's where we're leading to. We're going to share with you some of those multipliers and ways to already add value in those multipliers. But often what we see is this workhorse. It's not like there's a lack of effort. It's just that maybe we're not working in the right direction. Maybe we haven't been thinking this through. And as a result, as account managers or sales professionals, we see ourselves stuck, working harder, but not necessarily finding, Tony, that scalable exponential growth that is available to us. Once again, Tony, I'd like to hear from our audience because that's our view of the world. On a scale of 1 to 5, how does the workhorse story relate to you or your people? Who does this resonate with? And perhaps, Tony, if there's some people saying not relevant at all, we can see what their world says and maybe get some microphones opened up here. But everyone, if you just drop in the chat on a scale of 1 to 5, how does the workhorse story relate to you or your people? 1 being not relevant at all, and 5 being very relevant. Let's drop it in the chat and see what's coming through.
Yeah, Al, it's interesting. As you were speaking, another comment or two came in around if you're begging the account manager to complete the account plans, is it really that valuable to them? Someone else sharing neglect and ownership as the words. The many 4s coming through. So I haven't had a single 3 yet, but 4 very relevant, 4+. So let's call it a 4.5. Someone's sharing a 5. So this is definitely relevant. So we have this, as you said before, we're working these, perhaps these long hours. We're not getting the traction we need. We're certainly not scaling, with or without any of the technology that we have. So average is just over the 4L.
Okay, Tony, great news. When I say great news, it means that what we're sharing today in this Global Connect is relevant, which is always the measure of value. So if we look at the problem, we're going to start taking a slightly different lens now. And thank you everyone for participating because it really makes it beneficial. As some people were saying, Tony, if we're having to beg people to do it, then what is the value for them? And it's so interesting as we have this talk around the world around account management. It's often that's the biggest problem. The account managers don't see how it serves them. And perhaps there's another challenge we have to be focused on, which is often the problem, if we look at principle 3, is that account management is seldom the evidence of customer obsession and value creation. So it's often that it's focused on this company-led approach, which fragments performance. It's about our targets and our metrics and our sales motions and our initiatives and us protecting ourselves should this account manager leave. And do we have the data? Do we have the information? Do we have the SWOT? Do we have more? And quantity is an element, but that more doesn't necessarily mean that we have understanding. We have information. We might be starved of insights. So when we take that shift and we go to this customer-led approach, right? Performance can multiply. Do you understand their goals, their constraints, their outcomes, what they're trying to achieve? And that's the big question here, right? Account management is seldom the evidence of customer obsession and value creation. And once again, Tony, that may be the world according to us. But I think a critical, pivotal question everyone on the call should be asking, whether you're a sales leader, sales professional, in sales enablement, or managing a team. You want to be asking this because this can help us start to reshape how we look at account management and find those multipliers. If a customer judged your account management today as evidence of customer obsession and value creation, what grade would you get? Now, if you want to give yourself an E, you can, but we're not talking about a score yet. Do you get an A+? Do you go, this is evidence that we're obsessed with the customer. We're trying to drive value. It's driving the right behaviors in our business. Because so often we keep telling people, salespeople, the same logical thing to do, but our mechanisms and our systems and our approaches don't support that behavior. If you're measuring me on quantity of information submitted, I'm going to get that box ticked. But is it really kind of the evidence of customer obsession. Let's see what's coming through, Tony.
Yeah, so we have a 1. So I'm assuming the 1 is maybe a D minus. We have a C, C, and a B. So sometimes we're getting an okay score. A C is not a great score, but a B, maybe we're not getting to that A. Definitely a D minus, a C, a D minus, a C, a B. Yes, D minus. Someone's sharing it's an A. Maybe we're not there at that excellence level yet, but we're certainly at the sort of 80%, the A mark. I do remember the once I got an A in school L. I don't remember which grade it was in, but it did happen to me once along the journey. Lots of C's, Alan, coming through. So, we're not there. And a comment, I don't think we ask the customers enough for their feedback on our performance. So I love that one, because you spoke about our metrics and our this and our that. But what about their goals and what about their feedback? Because isn't value the perception of the customer?
So well put, and thanks for sharing. So that's a key thing we want to be discussing is, are we really doing this in thought or, thinking about the customer, even to the point that have we created a mature system that actually can start involving the customer in the journey and really partnering around this? When we look at the scores, it's great to see, Tony, that there are organizations and our managers starting to move towards, even at that A level, really strong around. If you ask our customers, they'd say, this is what it does. What I hear often is in pockets of excellence, but not always the entire organization. But if your organization's there, it's going to be the differentiator. Because then when you start to apply things and technologies and what to that approach in the right direction, you start to find how you create value at scale. And I want to stay true to the theme of our Global Connect. It's value at scale and there's nothing to the AI. Once again, not that you can't leverage it. It's really about how are we going about protecting our number one assets. Right? The only reason the company exists is to sell something. And for most of the people on this call, there's a disproportionate amount of consequence if we lose the top 5 accounts we have. Yet what we tend to see is we think that hope is a strategy. And there's an implication to this, Tony. And I just want to share with the audience that this is the final moment. This is where we're going to start to see the scale and the multipliers coming together. When we look at the knock-on implications of this approach, a new lens we can look at, and then unpacking how we improve each of those lenses. So we spend a lot of time on the problem. We're going to visit the customer one more time in a later slide. But the implication that we often see is that we build plans from our internal story. We create 4 predictable problems, right? Firstly, quality drops because we improve skills based on our priorities, not on the customer's biggest opportunities or risks. And if our priorities are get the information in, if the priorities are make sure the information is clean, if the priorities are all about and only about the account data, I'm not saying the account data doesn't matter. If it's only about that, well, then we start to apply our resources and our skills where we think the priorities are for our organization. And then the quality and relevance, Tony, of the conversations decreases. Quantity also stalls because we allocate effort based on noise, not on segmentation or customer value creation. Now, this is seemingly obvious, but what we often see in organizations is we don't do account planning because we're under-resourced, but we're trying to do everyone all the time in the same way, at the same level of complexity. And that is often, Tony, not the case. It's not what's going to drive that impact that you're wanting to create in that space. Effectiveness suffers because teams internally are not aligned to one coherent customer story. One of the big things, and we're going to be speaking about this probably numerous times in the session today, Tony, is there's got to be value for the customer that we see this practice of account management, mature account management, as creating value for our customers, right? But at the same token, it should be aligning the organization behind the sales professional or the account executive, because their credibility is held by other people's behavior. And what is the point of doing an account plan if the organization doesn't use it as the mechanism to align behind us? And then finally, account planning becomes an event, not a discipline. So efficiency collapses. So the common trends we see is a drop in quality, quantity, effectiveness, and efficiency that is caused by the fact that we haven't elevated our maturity. Now, some have, Tony, we've got some A's, some C's, these are moving in the right direction. we haven't really elevated that maturity. Say, wait a minute, how do we ensure we get really robust this so we can create value at scale and then deploy technology to take that to the next level? But we can't if we're going to multiply the inefficiency. So before I talk about what's hidden in the slide, Tony, and the gem that's there, anything you want to add on this?
I mean, as you know, Al, we talk about frameworks or models. I love this. It's the QQEE. And if you look at it with this balanced set of perspectives, if you like, you can start to say where we're going wrong. And I mean, you've taken them through this. A few comments coming through in the chat, Al. Someone saying we need to get customer feedback, and then a few comments around. I don't think we need to ask I don't think we ask the customers enough for the feedback. But then a dissatisfied customer doesn't respond. So when we're not getting, we think we're being ghosted. It's actually probably a reflection on us. Qualitative customer satisfaction feedback is super important. And then a completely satisfied customer will tell you. And you often don't need full feedback. So I love that perspective. If we're getting this right, the customer is telling you the feedback. Now, if we look at our surveys, perhaps we should be asking our surveys, some questions around quality, some questions around quantity and effectiveness and efficiency. That would be an interesting, quite practical way of doing this. And then a question coming through for you, Al, did we mean noise as a reactive response?
Yeah, so what happens is our effort bases on that noise. We don't necessarily find the signal. So we're very reactive. We're very much in firefighting mode. We're not moving to trusted partner or trusted advisor. We're finding that everything's coming at us and we're very reactive in that. So we're not going, wait a minute, but where are we trying to take this client? And how do we manage the perceptions? And how do we move where we want to get to? So that's what I was referring to when I speak about noise. Very reactive to what's coming at us, not necessarily proactively managing what we need to manage. But what you've alluded to Tony, and everyone, this is kind of where the pivot comes to what we want to share with you today is in what Tony just shared and what he's alluding to, perhaps in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And what if we could take the implications of ineffective account management and use that to start improving our grades, right? Whether that's a C getting into an A, or an A getting to A plus, or a D minus, just moving in the right direction. And I want to share with you a story that ties into that. I'm going to call it the exponential fisherman, right? So if the fisherman is like, how many fish we caught? Like we want to catch a certain bounty of fish. And obviously it's got to be the right type. So let's not get into the nuances of the narrative. But there's a couple of things that we can influence that help a fisherman be more effective at what they do and more exponential at what they do. Firstly, they can be more skilled as a fisherman, right? So there's a improvement in the skill. How well do we communicate with customers? How well do we ask the right questions? How now do we lead with insights? As an account executive, what are our skills as an individual and as an organization that we can influence? But then we look at the fisherman. It doesn't matter how skilled you are, you got to be doing something. So how active is the fisherman, right? And we say the right activity because doing more doesn't always get you a better return. But the point is, let's drop the debate that it's, well, no, it's not only about quantity, but quality. Of course, it's about both because you've got to be a good fisherman that's active enough. Zero activity doesn't get you anywhere. And too much activity at the cost of the skill, at the cost of the quality is not right either. So in this story, I'm a good fisherman. I'm busy enough. But what if I'm not fishing where the fish are? I have to be effective, right? I have to understand where's the right pond? Where are the fish? Where do I allocate my effort to get more effective? Because we can be really busy and very reactive to that noise and be that workhorse, but we're not moving the things that matter. We're not creating that exponential thing that allows us to create the value for our customers at scale. Because it's not going to happen by accident and it's not going to happen by sheer methodology. It's going to happen by the discipline of managing our accounts in a way that we are consciously finding the levers we can pull to drive exponential value for our clients. But now I can be a great fisherman, busy enough in the right pond, but I don't follow the right process. Right? I don't have the right equipment. I don't have the right tools. I don't have the right mechanism to do that. So yes, the technology, the tools can help. And the better my equipment, the better my results. But really, so often we do one of two things. Let's just do more and do it more efficiently. But are we skilled at what we're doing? And are we doing the right things? Because we want to make sure we have the quality and the effectiveness as well. So when you take this example as this fisherman, and you imagine that we just improve everything by 10%, 10% better our skill, 10% closer to the right balance of activity, 10% better where we allocate our effort in the right point, and 10% better following the right process, right? Understanding what it takes to make a sale or to catch a fish. The beauty with this and why it's value creation at scale is this is an exponential formula. It doesn't give you a 10% improvement in performance. It doesn't give you a 40% improvement in performance. In this case, it gives you a 46% improvement in performance. So effectively what that means is if we look at our account management discipline, and we're going to give you an idea for each of these pillars, right? But if we look at our account management discipline, the key thing is to say, what are the incremental changes we can make to drive an exponential improvement? Because Tony, what I've enjoyed is there's a lot of good commentary coming from the chat. My brain's going, where does that sit? Well, that's a qualitative, or that's a quantitative, or that's an effectiveness. Because then I can take these things and say, it's not only about customer feedback, but man, isn't that a multiplier? Because if you have good customer feedback and it's qualitative, you know what to do. So that can drive the behavior and the effectiveness. And then we can apply technology and tools and process to that to be efficient. So Tony, if we take that one level and we go make this about account management or customer-led account management, in the results, how well did we protect and grow the account? From quality, how skilled were we in closing the value gap? Now imagine we change this formula. Imagine if we're just 15% better. We focus on closing the gap to what the customer expects and what they experience. And what if we just get 15% better at having sufficient data about the account to make better informed decisions and share relevant insights? What if we're just 15% better in how we allocate our efforts to the right accounts and how we balance that effort so we're not just a workhorse that's busy, but we have direction. Doesn't mean we stop working, but we have direction. And then what if we're just 15% better at following an effective process for how we drive account management? Well, then the jump goes to 75%. So when we look at ways, and often in so many things we do, Tony, we try to find this big get out of jail free card or this big Hollywood moment or this big one thing, this game changer. I know you hate that word, game changer. That one game changer that's going to move everything. But right now, wherever you're standing, whether you're a leader, a manager, enablement, salesperson, or even the leader, you got to be thinking about the incremental improvements you can make in this area. And yeah, we're just sharing with you against account management. The formula can be applied to sales conversations. It can be applied to sales strategy. It can be applied to any area of your life. Because effectively, if we get those multipliers right, we get an exponential benefit from our activity. And we believe, and our key premise for creating value at scale is that customer-led planning is not a technique. It is a multiplier. It allows you to create value at scale. And we're going to unpack ideas against each of those four pillars. This isn't just theory, there's a framework, run away. But Johnny, I want to pause there, see what's coming through in the chat. But this is the stance. Incremental improvements that can drive exponential change. And one of the big things that organizations are missing is we're not taking care of the discipline of how we take care of our customers. And that should be what account management is about. Customer-led account management. To consciously, actively think about ways to drive value at scale. What's coming through, Tony? What do you want to share?
Just a question, Al. If you go back to the QQEE, the question was, do you mean the right activity, meaning engaged? So there's a question, maybe unpack the right activity metric, if you like, under the quantity block. And then there's a long story, which I'll share with you next.
Okay, so when we talk about the right activity, Tony, the key thing is to identify the balance. Obviously, we want people to engage, but that might be more that there's a quality associated to it. So once again, let's not let the box trip us up. But by right activity, and I'll use an example. Ellen, you closed 1 in 20 conversations. I need you to get more conversations. So I need you to go see 60 people, not 20 people. And basically what you're saying is, Ellen, you suck. Go suck in front of more customers. Right? Surely adding volume alone, quantity alone isn't going to get that. So when we say right activity, to ever ask the question, Often the problem is we're doing more of stuff that doesn't have a real significant benefit. Adding more data, populating more data, doing more SWOT analysis, whatever it is, but we're not figuring out, is that driving the balance of the equation? So right activity is going, if you look at effectiveness, doing the right thing, and then doing that often enough, right, with quality. So the view around right, Tony, is more around finding that balance, because there is a diminishing return on effort at a certain level of activity. You can't just workhorse your way out of this problem. You got to make sure you're maximizing that horse heading in the right direction. So I'm hoping that helps, but that's the premise of right activity. It's the right balance, because too much is going to diminish the other three, and not enough is not going to multiply them at all. Because if you put quantity at zero, the rest doesn't matter. The rest is theory. It's not practical value creation. Does that help, Tony, do you think?
Certainly that does help, Alan. It's exactly what we're busy with in our own business, is looking at, all areas of our business with this set of metrics. We're looking at quantity, quality, effectiveness, efficiency, and one more that you'll get to. And the reality, Al, is you can drive quantity up all day long. You can have more accounts, you can have more salespeople, you can have more meetings. Often that's, like you mentioned, at the cost of effectiveness. So maybe it's the wrong type of meetings. We're fishing again in the wrong pond or in the wrong season. So definitely that's valuable. In terms of the chat, a long story, but basically asking, they asked the customer experience team to send out a satisfaction survey. Many people, the customers, didn't respond because we're not engaging with the customers beforehand on a call, and then the survey arrives. So I think that's a great illustration of not being effective. We can do another survey, that's quantity. We can do 10 surveys, one a month, but it's actually not a great effectiveness. We're not actually going to get the right customers. Probably find we're going to get feedback from the good ones, or perhaps the very worst ones, but we're not going to get the right. It's not an effective way, and it's probably not efficient either. And then the second part, we have had much better success, doing the surveys in a meeting, which again, that's a better use of your time. So that's an effectiveness a metric. And then a simple RAG status across departments. So not 15 complicated ways of measuring things, just red, amber, green. And I would say, oh, that's quite an efficient way of doing it. That's a great process. Is it red, amber, and green? And if it's a red, perhaps there's an explanation. If it's an amber, what's the one thing I could do to improve? And that's helped this person a lot. The challenge is it often relies on account managers or SDM, service delivery managers, doing it regularly. So that's going to lead you to the next completion of this formula, because you have to do it regularly. Once in a 6-month period is pretty pointless. And then it's not realistic to do it for every single.
It's not a discipline in the business, it's a task.
Yeah, I love that. It's, as you say, it's not a habit, it's not a discipline. It's just something that you get tasked to do once in a while. And then the last comment, it's not realistic to do it for every single customer. So normally it's your top customers or potentially your strategic or growth customers. And that again talks to effectiveness. Let's really be effective. Let's fish where the fish are, as you mentioned earlier in your example. So a long comment, but great illustration of actually putting it into those blocks, as you mentioned, Al.
Hold on, Johnny. That's the key thing. When we look at improving sales or drive value, it's no one wakes up and says, let's piss our customers off. No one's got that view of the world. But the reality is, unless we can have the ideas, but sometimes, example, we can do a customer survey, but when we look at it, it's not actually the effective way to do it. It's not the thing that's going to tell us what we need to do. Joint account planning might be a better way to do it. Doing that on a regular cadence will be a far more consistent way to do that. Doing with a simplified framework that can, put this into perspective. Because often what happens with the RAG status, even, Tony, we get caught up in the red. And then let's just speak to the customer about the red. Okay, so let's look at some of these multipliers. I want to get practical about this. The first one I'm not going to dive into. We do enough of this one, right? So the first one is quantity. The account data is not the account plan. It is only a measure of the quantity of information. Let me just share this. It's going to come later. An account plan says who's going to be what by when to close the customer value gap over the next 12 weeks, so we can know we're getting better at protecting, partnering, growing our key accounts. And that's going to make much more sense when I share with you the value gap next, if you haven't seen it. But the key thing is we're collecting information. And it's important to collect information and store that information and have that repository and understand that it serves a specific thing. And what it should be serving is the planning, because before the plan comes the planning, right? So when we think about this, we have all this information, but what do we do with it? There's another challenge that I want everyone to reflect on. Sometimes a lot of information does not sit in our data repositories, does not sit in the mind of the account executive, but in the team that is servicing that customer on the ground, the team that is there daily, in their presence, in their space. And we don't often enough have a system to go, hey, let's get the collective team together, understand how we're doing with the customer, and then put that action plan together. So we would argue that one of the biggest multipliers, and all of these are multipliers, but is that we're not using the information effectively in planning so we can get to a solid plan that is practical and executable. How do we go about doing this? We have to take a lens. Now, some of you have seen this, some of you have not, but we see it from this perspective. The value gap is the gap between what customers expect and what they experience. If you don't understand what this means, just think about your last Valentine's Day. There's always a gap between what you expect and what you experience, right? And to close that gap, we have to realize value. We have to exchange value, give that to the client so that they can close this gap. And when we understand the gap, we can start to look at ways to better align to what the customer's needs are. But what we tend to see, my friends, is that often it's one myopic view. Did we deliver on or exceed our promises? Often we are so caught in triage, so caught in firefighting. No, they're not the same metaphors, Tony. So caught up in these things that what we're not doing is we're not getting to that point and going, but what else? Because it's not the only question customers are asking. They are asking, do you deliver and exceed your promises? That's about delivery. But they're also asking, do you know me and align to my business strategy? Is there alignment? And even if you're delivering on that and there's alignment, are you bringing insights and market trends and analysis and perspectives and experience to the table to help me create a better future for my business? Are you giving me direction? And so often what happens unintentionally in account management is we're comfortable taking care of the zoo. We don't like to call it farmers. We call them zookeepers because they're not going to shoot anything. Comes from our friend Mark Weinberg. So we're going to protect that. And then we so focused on delivery, so caught up in triage, so busy not getting support from the organization that the only benefit we get from a business at best is we get to protect that account. But by not meeting the second area, we struggle to partner with that account. We get kept in the vendor space. We get kept in eroding margins. We get kept being under threat by our competitors. And finally, without the ability to give them direction, how do we grow these accounts? So the key thing when it comes to planning, what we should be considering, specifically what can we do to close the gap between what a customer expects and what they experience based on these three pillars. And what I'd like to share with you, and I know this is quite text heavy, I'm going through quite quickly, is practically how we share this is there's something called a value gap canvas. So you've got these different needs. On the left, you've got the customer. On the right, you've got the business. So if we deliver to the customer, we can protect the account. If we align with the customer, we can partner with the account. If we give direction to the customer, we can grow the account. But anything we do that goes from planning to plan is going to require actions. And here's a lens of some of the things you can consider. And I want you to just pause for this moment and think about what this could do as a multiplier, just in that one area of the quality by which we're doing the plan. Because it's all well and good to fill out all that account data and do all of these things. But if it doesn't lead to these actions we can take, well, then the quality of our planning is poor. But this lever helps you improve the quality of your planning. So imagine if we thought about this: service delivery. How well are we delivering against our agreed promises? Key relationship status. How do we define the status of key relationships due to changes or delivery risks? Value perception. How well are we maintaining communication to ensure there are no perception risks? We go into so many meetings to tell the customer, this is all the red stuff. We don't go, hey, by the way, this is all the green stuff we're doing well. This is all the amber stuff that was red and we've resolved it. And here's the red stuff we're still dealing with. But more importantly, what protects actions does that drive? And not all those actions are going to be owned by just the account executive. But collectively, imagine putting a group of people in a room together that service the account and asking these questions. And yeah, we don't use a RAG status. We use a Likert scale of 1 to 5. Just where are we at? And what actions can we take to close it? Then we're going to talk about alignment. Do we know their goals and their strategy? How clearly do you understand what strategies and outcomes they're pursuing? Challenge and barriers. How clearly do we understand their challenges or barriers and how that affects them? And our relationship depth. How broadly are we establishing the right relationships in the account? And the answers to those questions and the gaps in that space should give us partner actions. And then when we want to give direction, how often are we researching and sharing insights that allow us to create more value? And then are we going and having those conversations? How consistently are we having those relevant conversations? And then are we measuring the impact of what we're delivering? Telling the story of the impact we're delivering? Or does the customer only remember the last fire we put out, but not the business impact we have as a partner? So what this does is it starts to give us a mechanism by which we can take the account information or the account data, which is really about quantity, and start adding a qualitative edge to it. But do we know what actually sits behind this? What action can we take? Because the power of this, Tony, before I stitch it into our formula, is customers will create the most amount of value for you at the point they realize you are trying to create the most value for them. And friends, you can't leave that to chance. If you want to create value at scale, this has got to be engineered as a discipline in your business. Because what we now have is we've got two of our four levers already. We've got quantity, which is the account data and information. And then we've got the account planning, the quality of our thinking about how we think about this account and the specific actions we can take. It is not the plan yet, but there's robust quality around the planning. Tony, I know a lot for the people to take in. I hope it was valuable, but the highlight level is if we understand the gap between what they expect and they experience, and we use a simple framework to analyze that and identify actions, we can influence the quality multiplier of how we take care of our key accounts. What do you want to add there, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, Alan, it's as you mentioned, it's if you're seeing this for the first time, you might be going, "Oh, wow, okay, that's only 2 blocks out of the number of blocks that we're going to get to, or steps in this process." But it's actually fairly simple. However, it's so powerful. So if you go back to your previous slide, not that you need to, but if we think back to your previous slide, there's many questions. They're tough questions. They're sometimes hard for us to answer. But if we knew all of these things, wouldn't it be so amazing? Because we would almost understand the status. So is this customer to us actually in that delivery protect mode, or maybe we're moving into the partner mode? Rather than get stuck in these conversations we see salespeople, sales managers having all the time, really we need to partner with our customers.
Spot on, Tony. And
Actually
what if this
partner
was
with your
informing your survey?
spot on. And these exact questions could inform the survey. And then most importantly, as we always say, Al, is once you know this, then it's about what action can we take? Eyes wide open. Let's be honest. This customer is actually in a delivery mode. We need to protect them, as a customer. But let's not try and pretend that they're a partner or even one of those more strategic accounts that we, actually showing them direction. We're helping them with their direction. Or if we decide they are key to our future, then let's move up or down the stack, if you prefer, from delivery to alignment to direction. So for me, again, it's a great reminder that we've got to be honest and score these blocks and answer these tough questions. But then it's about how do we move this to action? How do we make this practical? So yes, I think this has been a valuable slide for a number of people. Going back to the value gap, Al, as you know, this is what we talk about all the time. What's the gap between what the customers expect and what they experience? And in the good old days, that used to be just deliver a product that works and things are fine. And then it moved to making sure that there's a solution that integrates, and now it's about outcome. So very similar to what you're sharing from an account planning point of view. Can we move from delivery to alignment to ultimately direction? Or are we, with certain customers, happy to be in the protect mode? So this is definitely resonating with your audience today.
Thank you, Tony. So let's go to those other multipliers. We have the multiplier quality. Now, some people may argue and say, "Oh, but that's also got effectiveness, player efficiency." Don't over-engineer it. The thing is, you have a lever to pull. And what it means is you have a practical, in that specific case, one canvas view of what it is we can do, and you can't do everything. You've still got to prioritize that and plan it and get to it. But you've got that multiplier. And then it gets to the account, or what do you call the account action plan, right? And this is really about what specifically do we need to do to protect and align to grow this account. And what we like to do is just say to people, what's that one-page account plan? Right? What do we have to go find out or do to establish the right relationships, or find out or do to create value, or find out or do to have relevant conversations, or find out or do to align the outcomes? What do we know about the account's history and context, or what do we need to go find out or do, and what's the support? Now, whatever that looks like in your organization, the key thing is a plan should be about who's going to do what and when, and ideally why, which is the planning part, right? So that we're not the workhorse. We're not just responding to every single priority and every single thing and not taking control of how we're creating value. And then what we start to do is by doing that, we become far more efficient in how we do that account planning. Because many times it's this laborious process that happens once a year. And I'm not saying you don't do it once a year, get your data information right, get your SWOT analysis, get that data right. But it's a living process. It's understanding the gap by doing some planning. That's a quality multiplier. And then finding efficiently, how do you drive those actions, right? How do you get that to then become an efficiency play? So it's not everything we're trying to do. We're trying to be, how do we now do that efficiently? How do we deploy processes and technologies and tools to that, Tony? But the challenge that a lot of people face is, how do you get the organization aligned behind your account management motion? How do you get them aligned behind it? Because we often, the frustration of account managers is we do the work. We tell the business, well, this is the issue. There's a burning platform here. We're going to lose this account because we're not delivering. And the organization goes, no, we hear you, but still act like they never heard you. So last question I'm putting to the audience, Tony, before I go to the last two pillars we can leverage, is how do you kind of go about getting the organization aligned behind you? Or is this a challenge for most people? Anything you want to share while we wait on the chat, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, as you say, Al, it's one thing knowing that the salesperson, if I'm the salesperson, or even if I'm the sales manager, I need people in my organization to be involved. I need them to deliver certain things. I need them to price there's many things that the organization needs to help me with. So some of the comments coming through, the first one, involve them in the process. So that's an interesting one. So maybe through the process where we're doing some of our thinking and our planning, get them involved earlier. Communicate. Of course, it's part of our framework for execution, the 6C framework. We talk about communicate. But what do we communicate? In what way do we communicate? Tell them how much money they will miss. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Some people, I don't want to say don't care, but some people certainly will care. Tell them, what's at risk here. Make sure that you can elevate, the importance of something. And sometimes you have to fight with your colleagues to get the resources, as we all know in sales. Collaboration, so work together, similar to involve them in the process. Collaborate and do it sooner. The what's in it for them. Again, it depends on who you're talking about. So for some people, it's very important to them, and other people, well, they've also got, their own chaos. I mean, we're going to talk about, the stoic mindset and the chaos of sales, because many other people are sitting with the chaos of operations or the chaos of service delivery. So what's in it for them? Not always. How will they benefit? Of course, if you can persuade them. Buy them roses, buy them chocolate, buy them whiskey. I don't know. How will they benefit? Create an internal customer supplier culture. That's always interesting, again, for me to hear is, you got to treat them as a customer, and you're actually their customer, and we get into these internal versus external customers. I don't always see that working because it's still got to be the right culture. Interdepartmental accountability, something we work with many organizations to help them with, is how do you drive that culture of accountability across the organization behind the sales effort? What are the consequences of joint failure? So again, Al, the carrot and the stick, this is what you're going to get if this works, but if it goes wrong, this is the consequence. We're going to have to lay off people maybe, or whatever that looks like. So again, all good ideas and components of a solution. Any more answers? Any more thoughts on this? How do you actually get your organization to come behind you, to join in your Account management motion, your ability to deliver value to customers. Two more answers. L, facilitates seamless communication across internal processes to achieve alignment with our clients' requirements. Yeah, again, that's whoever commented that, it's right. It's technically right. It's theoretically right. But how do you do that? And definitely the communication is key. A transparent mechanism, including all of what was mentioned by Ellen, that becomes the heartbeat of sales. So I love that concept, that heartbeat, that rhythm, that cadence. So some great answers coming through here. One last one, and then I'll get you to share.
So yeah, that's the last one.
We are really trying to get everyone to treat the business as if it were their own. Get them to buy into the mission of the company, communicate, talk about this even as early as the interview process. We want the right people in the right positions and the same mindset and the performance culture, getting them to understand the importance of account management and providing the best possible service. And obviously from an account manager's perspective, if you're not talking to your customer, then somebody else is.
Spot on. And I mean, Tony, just going to the richness of those answers, and once again, those ideas work. That the key thing we're trying to find by creating value at scale is how do we bake that into a discipline? How do we bake it into the business? And we just want to share with you something that we've seen work really well. And it's the concept of the story, right? It's critical to align the organization behind all your efforts. Without it, your value will not scale. And the reason we speak about a story is that a story is 22 times more memorable than facts. Now, we don't have time to go through the entire story, but effectively, this is just a couple of slides. It's like a 10-minute TED talk that an account executive does to the business and the stakeholders to say, this is the story of this account. So here's some history and context. These are the delivery risks, the alignment risks, and the partner risks. This is the revenue under threat. This is the revenue opportunities. These are the actions I'm going to take. And these are the asks I have of you, which makes the output worthwhile for all the work we have to do to get to that point. Because what we have seen is that when we add that effectiveness multiplier, we drive the behaviors in the other area. Because to tell that account narrative, I have to have the information, I have to do the value gap canvas, I have to put together a plan, and then I can tell the story. This is the history and context of the account. These are the delivery challenges, the alignment challenge, and the partner challenges. This is the revenue under threat and the revenue opportunities. These are the actions I will take as an account executive within my circle of influence. And this is my ask of the business, right? And that story, as simply as I'm saying it now, is not much more complicated, but it requires the previous multipliers. So what we now get in this fourth multiplier, we get an exponential benefit on the others. Because if the rhythm in the business is we do quarterly stand-ups where we tell the account story, right? And we then align the organization behind that, what then starts to happen is it becomes the way you do things around you. And by the way, my friends, that is the definition of culture, the way we do things around you. So if you just think about what we shared, so understanding that the account data and stuff is really about quantity. Do we have enough information to drive insights? Then we multiply by that the quality of just thinking through the value gap. How well are we closing the value gap? What actions do we need to take? How does this translate into an actual plan? And because the entire account can't belong to one person, it's an organizational responsibility to take care of their customer. What's the story we tell the business? And then, my friends, one last bonus multiplier, because as you know, this is managers as a multiplier. We believe with certainty as growth matters, it's a mountain we're willing to die on. That unless you invest in your sales managers, you don't get the scale, is you have to be running an account review to drive consistency. Consistency creates momentum. Someone said it earlier, Tony, you touched base on it, but consistency becomes that multiplier. So when we think about account management, there's a way to find these levers to pull to improve the quantity of our information where it's relevant, the quality of how we do the planning, the efficiency of the actual plan and how we execute it, the effectiveness by which we align the organization, and the consistency by which we review accountability on those actions. So account management becomes the way in which we take care of customer value and start to drive it at scale. Then we deploy technologies and tools. And as we keep improving this, for example, that effectiveness could be, that the quality could be a survey that's better or more aligned, There's all these ideas we have that we now apply to a system that operates, because it's the discipline of account management that drives value at scale, not the idea of it, not the intention of it. Bottom line is the most difficult thing. Sorry, most difficult thing in the decision is the decision to act. The rest is just tenacity. You've got to keep at it. So as we move towards a close, Tony, there's a question on the pose. What if you just improve each area by 10%? What if you just look at this more holistically and think about how do you improve this just by 10%? How do you think about the quantity, quality, efficiency, effectiveness, and then the consistency, the momentum you build? You just did that by 10%. This is how you start to create value creation at scale, because these behaviors or these disciplines drive behaviors. To run that value gap canvas, I've got to be having value-based conversations. I've got to be getting all those things we say so logic to salespeople, but we don't bake it into our discipline of mature account management. And that, my friends, is how we drive value at scale. We can then deploy the tools to that, but it's in the maturity by which we put our customers in the center of how we drive account management. Honey, back to you. Before I go to
Alan,
tips.
Yeah, I mean, again, Al, if you look at it, if you go back to the math there, if you go back one slide, so always it's interesting for me, and whenever we talk about this, it's a 46% improvement if you improved by 10% in each of these blocks. Now, that was when there were 4. Now we've got 5 blocks. So if you did 10% across each, I think it comes to around about the sort of 165% or thereabout. It's an exponential improvement. And the weird thing is, I check the math over and over again because I go, well, does that really make sense? But if you take the 10% and you multiply it, you're not adding 10%. So it's not 40%, it's a multiplier. And I think that's the key thing here. Even in the one area, let's say hypothetically quantity, you leave it as it is. And you can't improve in that area, but you can improve in 4 other areas. That's still 46% or more improvement. So I think sometimes we're waiting for this big thing, this AI to solve the world, or we're waiting for this, massive hyperleap, as you may have mentioned earlier, where actually it's just these small disciplines, these small habits, whatever you want to call them, that really make all of the difference. The compounding, the compound interest, the compounding effect is so important. And yeah. What if you just improved each area by 10%? That's a great question for the audience just to reflect on for a second.
Yeah, Tony, and then depending on where the audience is, this is a framework we share. We're not going to go through the detail of the 4 responsibilities of the different roles in the sales ecosystem. And what we want to make sure that happens as we build out this global connect community is that we're delivering a message that is relevant. I'd like to hear your perspective, Tony, but my perspective is quite clear on this one. Effective account management galvanizes the ecosystem behind the customer and is relevant to every single person on this page, because it's what actually shows us evidence of the fact that we aren't just chasing the quota, we aren't just chasing the target, we aren't just chasing our strategy. We are actively creating value for our customers at scale, because that's going to show up on all the metrics that matter when we get it right. What's your view on that, Tony, before I get to traps and tips and we can close out the session? You're on mute, Tony.
Jumping to the sales management block straight away, Al. If I reflect on what was shared by the audience in the chat today, we have to hold our people accountable. And whose role is that? Well, we actually have to hold account managers accountable. The sales managers need to do that. So if you look at that one, to drive client value, to drive customer value, you really have to focus. As a sales manager, here's a tool. Like you mentioned, Al, it's that galvanizing or collaborative approach now. But I have to do that. If I'm a sales manager, I have to drive customer value. If I'm the salespeople, of course, I need to do the account planning and the account management as you've gone through. And then if I was a sales enablement person, sales operations, I actually have to enable decisions. I've got to help the sales team, the sales managers make the right decisions. Which accounts am I going to prioritize? What's important in terms of the data? And then around productivity. Productivity is exactly that. Productivity is making sure I'm efficient, I'm effective, I'm driving up quality and so on. If I'm a sales leader, I look and I say the one thing I can do regarding this is the sales culture. I must make sure that I'm driving accountability. This is not a question of are we going to do something, let's call it this account management approach. It's not a matter of are we going to do it, it's how exactly are we going to do it, how many accounts, and by when will it be done. So they have to drive that accountability. And then if we step up, if I was a CEO or a senior level executive, not necessarily a sales leader, I would have to be saying, we can talk all day long about how important the customers are to us and how valuable they are and how we don't exist without them and all of that. I don't want to say rhetoric, but the words we see in the reception areas. The bottom line is that this is a method to get the whole organization, I think you said it, to galvanize, to align around the customer. Not around technology, not around sales skills, not around anything else, but to galvanize around the customer. So I love that one. A few comments coming through, Al. How about the performance evaluation of each role? So again, if I had to look at this, and I would say, well, you can build a scorecard, you can work out performance, and you could look at quality, quantity, effectiveness, efficiency, and consistency within each role. I mean, that is some of the work that we do, is let's measure, as an example, sales managers against those metrics. Other questions coming through, Al, you can pick up on that one. Or what about those involved in things like renewals, customer care, success? How do we involve them? How would you put that into the role, and specifically as it relates to scaling customer value?
Well, so Tony, for me, that is making sure we have a campfire of collaboration. That campfire of collaboration should be the value gap canvas. As you know, for many of our large global clients, that's what they do. They have a quarterly motion where they've got to do their account narratives. And to do that, they do their value gap canvas with the broader team and understanding their role, understanding what's happening. So, as you know, Tony, when we take this to market, it's to the broader service team, everyone's team, because it's not just sales responsibility to own the customer. So I'd say in the simplest of view, how you involve everyone is to align thinking. So that's the framework, and then utilize the tool that says, let's get collaboration happening. And from that collaboration, identify those priority actions. So that would be my view of a small incremental thing we could do to have an exponential impact. Talking about it doesn't fix it. You've got to have that campfire collaboration, which is the framework which drives that quality. Picking up one conversation around sales enablement. So, sales enablement maturity depends in different organizations. Really what you're trying to do is how are we leveraging methodologies, technologies, and disciplines to scale what we're trying to do from an organizational transformation perspective, right? So are we enabling the right decisions? Are we enabling our talent? Are we driving productivity? Are we enabling the environment? And the mechanisms to do that are normally methodologies, technologies, or disciplines. And how we're going about creating that traction point. What we tend to see, though, is that there's a disproportionate investment in enablement without an investment in the custodians of execution, which are the sales managers. We take most of the sales managers, promote them from a top performer to a sales manager with no system in place to prepare them for that role. So they are their traction point. So I hope that helps answer that question. But Tony, I think the key thing is it seems obvious that we should be galvanizing around the customer. But a lot of what happens in business, specifically sales, is we measure the things that don't speak to that. And that's why, even if you talk about how do you measure someone's performance, I'm saying, well, are we talking about their outcome? Or are we talking about their skill? Or are we talking about the entire QQEEC component, right? The quality, the quantity, effectiveness, efficiency, and the consistency. Because the point is, if we just say, hey, are you good at this? But we have the wrong measurement systems. We have a once a year account data collection exercise. We don't support the account manager when they tell the business, I'm going to lose business here. But when they do, they get penalized in their revenue. When we don't get that right, you're not actually measuring performance. Performance is the system. And then the individual skills we want to definitely measure. Okay. Tony, moving on to some traps and tips. I know there's some additional questions coming through, but we can revisit them just that we get to where we need to before anyone needs to drop off. And then we're welcome to pick up those questions again, Tony. So just some traps and tips seem somewhat obvious, but being hopeful is a trap. Well, we hope that everyone understands that we're trying to take care of our customers, maintain their revenue, and find ways to protect them, partner with them, and grow them. Well, you want to be intentional. You want to intentionally find those incremental things that drive exponential results that support us in driving that. And obviously, this is one of many disciplines in sales, because what about how we communicate value, and how about how we plan our number, and how about, I can go on. But you want to be intentional. You want to build a system that drives the sales behavior and then improve the individuals. Another common trap, Tony, is delivery as satisfaction. As long as the customer is happy and we've delivered, we've fixed the problem. But the reality is your competitors are entering through that back door. They're entering through outcome-based conversations and alignment conversations. So you want to look at your value gap as your differentiation. Just for those on the call that haven't picked this up, the value gap we've seen has been very effective at driving joint account planning with customers as well. So you can put that same canvas and go, hey, wait a minute, how are we doing it? And get their view on it. And as someone said, get the account executives involved, not just, hey, let's send it to a survey team. And I think the big trap, Tony, is we end up living in triage. It's that workhorse running 11 hours a day, doing their absolute best, but trying to figure out which of the two patients is it going to save. And at the same thing, not getting the outcome we want, not finding that protection of accounts, that growth in accounts, or that partnering in those accounts. So when you want to be healthy, you've got to plan for that health so that you don't live in the triage. Right. And that's the key thing, is so much what's happening is this. We keep saying, I think Tony used the word rhetoric. It's a very good word, because we say these things that are obvious, but we don't bake it into the systems that are our multipliers. We just add more technology, but we don't go, when is the system right? Are we mobilizing the right thing here? And when we start to think about that as a discipline, we can start to then scale it and create massive differentiation in the markets we serve. Tony, before we close out with any questions and answers and address some that haven't been addressed, just want to recap of what's coming up, what Tony has mentioned, and we go through it quickly. Remember to save the dates, 11th of February 2026. You will be getting invitations and advertisements and all the rest, really about the stoic sales mindset. As we're facing this chaos and this noise, and I would argue even the fear of uncertainty, as technology starts to be scaling at a rate that we've never experienced before. How do we remain stoic and leverage our mind to manage that chaos in sales? Because it's easy to get pulled into that noise. And we want to mature our mindsets that we are navigating that noise and not being pulled into it. And then our sales enablement multiplied happening on the 26th of February, specifically around sales enablement. How do we help them tell this story of impact and unlock growth through enablement? What we're seeing as a key trend in many of our customers is we're doing a lot of things, but we're not finding the multipliers. We really want to help that community to understand what are the incremental things you can do to drive exponential change and growth, so that you can tell the business the value you bring to the organization. And Tony, that brings us to the end of our session.
Yeah, excellent. We'll certainly be on the call for a few more minutes, and if there are questions and insights, I would like to pick up on one or two in the chat. For those of you who want to drop off, you're most welcome. You can drop a comment or a thought in the chat, and then drop off. Warren was sharing something interesting. Al, could you please provide a short explanation of what the sales enablement would look like in an environment? So if you look at the 4 areas within the sales enablement role, just good to understand what this teams look like in practice, who's involved in the sales enablement team. Sometimes we call it sales operations, because we have operations and enablement, and they're doing many things. So maybe let's just open that up. And if there are sales enablement people on the call, perhaps drop us a note to say, please include us in the event in February. I think you'll find it really useful.
No, so Tony, it's okay, because it's answering that. We're going to be answering those questions specifically. But if we look at just the historic view of sales enablement and operations, if you think about enablement, is really around the talent and the productivity of that talent. And the operations is how do we make better decisions, and how do we have the right policies in our environment. So how that looks as a specific team is not always clear. But in many businesses, Tony, we kind of take sales training and then we call it sales enablement. In actual fact, we have to enable decisions. So is the technology we're utilizing, is the information we have helping us make better decisions about where we allocate our effort, how we're going to get our number, where we're at risk in the market. So what is the data telling us? What are the insights that help us and accelerate our ability to make better decisions? Are we enabling the talent? So are we giving them the right skills? Are we putting together the right things that get them ready to build their talent around, for example, value communication, or what are we doing to actually enable their talent and get them trained. In addition, from a productivity, which you could summarize as efficiency and effectiveness, how are we giving them the tools that then drive it? So the one is the talent, the behaviors, but then what are the tool sets that we're driving to help them be more productive? Are we getting them to fill in complex forms on the CRM system and it's difficult and it crashes every third day? Or are we really looking at how ways we drive better quality, effectiveness and efficiency into that system through the technologies that are available? And then enabling the environment is often about psychological safety, Tony. So what's our remuneration policy? What happens when me and another person sell collectively on an account? What is our, how do these things work around here so that I don't have that uncertainty? But sometimes, specifically in businesses, they're trying to get more of a collective sales motion to their customers so that it's not disjointed. Often the question is, but who owns this? Because that BU or business unit has got its, profit and loss statement and what happens to the commission. So it's really about creating an environment of certainty. So those are some of the areas. There's 180, I think something it is, that sits in this pillar, but all of them will fit in one of those 4 areas. So I'm not sure that answers the question in enough detail in the time allowed, but really it's about making sure that if our transformational agenda is this sales leader, and we want to execute like this, how are we giving that organization the traction points to enable them to succeed so they can make better decisions, be more skilled at what they're doing, leverage the tools and technologies to drive that at scale, and in an environment where they feel psychologically safe.
I mean, I like what you're sharing there, Al, and especially when it comes to those 4 blocks, and it was a real struggle when we were building this originally. I can remember to say only 4, because absolutely there's many things that are in this. I like the environment, also to include things like input to culture and so on, but definitely the policy would sit in there. We had a question from Sheikh Musin Ali. I'm not sure if he's still on, but what metrics will be measured for each role? Which is an interesting question, and I think we touched on it, but maybe just allude to any other thoughts on this one.
Well, Tony, what I dropped in the chat is prioritizing each responsibility in their role, not just their lag metrics. So the tendency is we measuring, for example, if you take the sales manager, get the number. The ultimate measures often get the number. Now, we know it matters, but we've seen many mediocre sales managers win sales manager of the year because they got the number, right? So what we're trying to share with this ecosystem is, are you looking at the other areas? How well they're aligning that behavior to where the company's going? How well are they developing their people? Is there a cadence of coaching? Are they focused on it? Are they driving the client value? Do they own it, or are they slightly involved? So the key elements of what are those building blocks of the way you'd assess that, not just the outcome, because obviously the outcome in sales is going to be the number. We're not negating them. What we tend to see is we overmeasure all of this stuff without a system that supports it anyway. So my view, Tony, would be really focusing on making sure there's a balance between the things we do and then the things we get. As we like to say, you have to be, which is maturity of thinking, which is our big mission as Growth Matters, give frameworks of thinking that drive that maturity so that you can go and do the right thing so that you can have that outcome. The tendency in sales is, what do we measure that's an output, not necessarily what do we measure that is an input behavior.
And I mean, if you look at the sales leadership, again, are you measuring the sales leadership on meeting the number? Maybe you should be measuring the sales leadership actually on transforming things that are transformative. How well are we navigating, as we like to call it, how well are we navigating the change? Or are we using change as a multiplier? That would be a great metric. Setting the sales strategy. How practical is it? How executable is it? That could be a great metric, and that would fit in somewhere in the QQEEC. Engineering the sales culture. So often I see sales leaders not really getting that active in that. Okay, but it depends on your team. No, just engineer the sales culture. What should the sales culture be? What is world class, if you like that saying, sales culture be? And then probably the final question for today, Al, unless there are any others coming through in the chat, again from Sheikh Musin Ali, how do we know the sales ecosystem was effective? I quite like that tough question to end the session off.
Yeah, I think there's a multitude of things, but if I take a starting point, is that we are starting to see evidence that we drive customer-led approaches in our business and that there's alignment behind it. Um, if I'd say very practically, what I often see, or we often see, Tony, is not my customer. And it's almost like sales is something that happens over there, and there isn't that sales culture. I think the key measure for me is, does the organization realize that the only reason we exist is to sell something? And to do that, we align behind the account manager. But to do that, they have to have their house in order. Right? So we've got to be improving the quality, quantity, effectiveness, efficiency, and consistency by which we do that. That would be a starting point of the sales ecosystem starting to evolve. But then it's also within those roles is as we're transforming, are we seeing a shift in where our revenue comes from? Are we seeing a shift in sales behavior? So it's those elements of what we're trying to achieve, because often it's the idea of transformation is easy, Tony, but it's very seldom that actual sales conversation on the far right of this diagram changes. The big one we've seen to accelerate this is when the business leadership understands we're a sales organization, and then everything changes a lot quicker. Because often we get caught up thinking we're an operational or manufacturing or technology company. We're a sales organization that happens to sell technology or manufacturing or whatever it may be. Tony, your thoughts?
Yeah, spot on. And I mean, I would almost say one of the metrics that maybe is the ultimate metric is consistency, because it's very easy to hit your target in a quarter. When I say very easy, I say that respectfully. You can hit a target in a month or a quarter or a half year, but when you've done it, 15 quarters in a row, then you know that your sales ecosystem is working. So maybe the ultimate measure for the sales ecosystem is that consistency, and things are going to go wrong and market conditions are going to change and customers are going to do crazy things. But if you're consistent, if you quarter by quarter consistently hitting your numbers, your growth targets, your scaling targets, I think that would be a great metric. Probably to say that the sales ecosystem now has got to a point where it's actually a multiplier. You really are leveraging your resources.
Yeah. I mean, Tony, the only other thing is we have the sales system health check, which checks the 12 elements of the sales ecosystem, and you can start seeing that maturing. But I think it's not a destination as much as it is a maturing of things, right? So knowing how we start to improve those elements within the ecosystem.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Alan and the team for the session today. And thanks everyone for joining us. You're most welcome to drop off or drop a comment or a question in the chat. If there are no more questions, then we'll end the session. And as I mentioned earlier, we have one more session later today. So if you have any colleagues or one or two people asking, Mitch did share in the chat the link for the later session. That's aimed primarily at our Northern American colleagues for the afternoon session, but you're more than welcome to join that session this evening, Africa time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.